Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Healthy Co-Parenting. Okay, so today I am going to share a very personal story. Personal in the sense that when my marriage broke up, I had to cope with tremendous verbal abuse that was based on deep-seated anger in my then husband, who became my ex-husband. If I were living in a developed country at the time, the behavior warranted getting law enforcement involved. However, my circumstances and the context were completely different. I was not living in a developed country. I would never have wanted to involve law enforcement. But I am going to just share with you how I handled the situation. At the time, my children were under a year old, and the other was just past 4 years old, so 4.5 or thereabout. At this stage of life, all I was focused on is the protection, safety, and custody of my children. I was just totally consumed with their safety and security, physical and emotional. And less about mine. I actually didn't give my own emotional and physical safety as much concern as I should have done at the time. So we were separated, and we were no longer living together, obviously. But I wanted my children to have the very minimum exposure minimum external exposure, meaning I was trying to minimize how often he took them and also the length of time, because I feared that his emotional security was not at its best. So what I did was I used to allow him access of whenever he wanted to come and visit. I would allow him to come and visit, because I also felt that in that way he would see that he was not being discouraged, his visiting rights were not being taken away, or he was not being deprived of any access to them. So that was also important to me, just to bring the temperature down, because there was a lot of heat coming from his side. So I wanted to neutralize the situation as much as I could. What was within my personal power and authority to do. So I allowed this access. But there was ongoing verbal abuse. It was just ongoing. Again, I will say that my support system was huge. And huge in the sense that it's not the number of people, but it was a nucleus of people from all age groups and life experience. So they were constantly there to support. They weren't telling me what to do, but I could readily ask them, because they made themselves so willing and available. Also, they recognized the stress that I was under, and they would often help in the sense that they would come, maybe take the older girl, not so much the baby, but as they got older, they would take both. But, they would relieve you for a couple hours one day, try to do some fun thing with the kids. So, in effect, what that meant for me is it was a stress reduction factor from that nucleus of support that I had. And it was huge. It was huge at the time. So anger, how did I respond to this anger? And the anger was directed at me, totally directed. It was a one-to-one onslaught. And I'm not going to share what was said, because that's not important. That's now all history. But just to say it was sharp, it was pointed, and it was ongoing for a long period of time, longer than I should have tolerated it. Okay, but I gave the reasons why I did. And I do not altogether feel sorry for my approach at the time. Because again, I reiterate that it was to neutralize the heat that I was getting, the anger that was being manifested, and just to ensure to the person, or demonstrate to the person, that you would never be deprived of access to your children. And I think that was an important signaling at the time. And I think that is also an important signaling for anyone who is going through the process of a separation, or who has separated and are transitioning to a co-parenting relationship. It is just important for us to recognize that each parent has equal stake in the game. Okay? So what did I do? One of the things I did is I never responded. I just never responded to the nonsense that was going on. It is unbelievable for somebody who is not a laid-back person that I was able to maybe turn on the thinking part of my brain to say that I needed to apply logic to this situation. And that is, in fact, what I did. I looked at it from a very logical point of view. And I said to myself, this is not normal, what is being manifested here. It just didn't come across as normal. So I decided that somebody had to stay logical in this situation. And my response was a non-verbal response, total non-verbal response, and a non-physical response. Even though it was a psychological and emotional threat to my own well-being. But I knew the dangers of me responding in a volatile manner. That just didn't make sense. While I saw what was going on, I said to myself, I am not going to personalize this situation, because this is not about who I am, and what the person is spewing, I am not receiving it. This is about who that person is at that particular time, and it was speaking to their own emotional and mental state. So sometimes we really do need not to personalize situations, but to say to ourselves, this is not about me, this is about the other person's state of mind. And they may actually need therapy for the situation they're going through, whatever it is. So while I took these emotional blows for an extended period of time, I took full responsibility for managing the situation and for what was happening, because somebody had to, and it was not going to be the other party. So it was about managing what was a volatile situation, and one that had the capacity to escalate at any time, even though at the time I didn't see it that way. But it had the capacity to escalate. And while I acknowledged what was going on, because I couldn't do otherwise, it was clear to the natural eye what was going on, what I didn't do was to accept blame, because it was not about me, and we should not accept blame for anybody's personal bad or poor behavior, inappropriate, let's put it, inappropriate behavior, because the behavior was in fact inappropriate. but I would never accept blame for it because somebody else's behavior, I'm not responsible for it. We have choices about how we respond to situations. And if we take blame for other people's inappropriate behavior, what it means is that we are giving power to people. We are giving power to people about about our own lives. We are allowing them to have inordinate power over our lives. And that is not acceptable. It is just not acceptable. Now, in relationships, we have to determine whether how we move forward from there in relationships like these. Do we renew them or do we release them? And in my case, there was no evidence that there was going to be a renewal. So over time, and it took time, but I decided that this was a relationship from which I had to be released. I just had to be released from it, and came to the position where I had to own that going forward, this is going to be a co-parenting relationship. So I had to come to that recognition. Definitely. Now, looking back, what I think I could have done much better was I should have set appropriate limits to minimize the risk to my own safety. Because after all these many years, I have seen other situations where it escalated into physical abuse. And physical abuse has many different levels, some in which we get injured and some in which we lose our lives. And I know of many different situations like that. So when we do not have a lot of life experience and training for a field to which we are new, we definitely have to seek help. And at that time, as I said, I had a nucleus of support from people with a variety of life experiences. But counseling and professional coaching was not mainstream at that time, and certainly not in my community. However, for my own emotional well-being, I think I managed the situation in a way that allowed me to remain emotionally stable for my children. Because I didn't personalize the situation, and I recognized that something must be wrong that needed remedial action on the other party. And what I kept falling back on was my faith. And I would pray for my own strength and for God's guidance and direction. Also, I decided to choose the route of forgiveness because I learned in my young life at the time that bitterness and unforgiveness, it doesn't affect the person for whom it's targeted. It affects the giver. And the person to whom it's targeted needs to do that release, and to do that release as soon as possible, and let the actions become like water on a duck's back. And for my own emotional survival, that's what I did, because the whole scenario at that time seemed so unnatural to me. My advice to anybody at this time, however, who is going through or experiencing anger issues with a partner, or verbal abuse, I would say immediately respond to it by getting professional counseling. Immediately. It is non-negotiable, it is dangerous, and there is always the point of escalation. And escalation means that it can cause personal harm from an emotional and physical point of view, and it can be so severe that the recovery process can be an Herculean task. Finally, in every relationship, someone needs to be a hero or a heroine. And this is a hard task because it means biting your lips. It means sometimes letting somebody walk over you for that time. But you are doing it with an end goal, which is usually the protection of your children, the safekeeping, the welfare and the well-being of your children. And so we often have to choose, for the purposes of reconciliation, that someone has to be a hero or a heroine. And so I'm going to end with a quote from the movie My Giant. Without Goliath, David is just some punk kid showing rocks. So friends, be the hero or the heroine that you need to be in the situations as they arise. See you next time.